The evening air was thick with the scent of grilled seafood and the faint sweetness of tropical flowers. The resort's grand dining hall gleamed under golden chandeliers, where laughter and clinking glasses filled the space. It was an exclusive paradise, a place where only the wealthiest could afford to dine, where luxury was expected, and where those who served blended into the background like shadows. At the far end of the room, a chef stood behind the open kitchen counter, silently, observing the guests. He had worked in many prestigious places, but this resort was different. It had an air of old money, the kind that reeked of entitlement. He had learned to read people well, to understand them through their orders, their mannerisms, their treatment of those they deemed beneath them. And tonight, one particular family caught his attention. A couple and their teenage son sat at a table draped in crisp white linen. The husband, dressed in a designer polo shirt and an expensive watch that glimmered under the lights, tapped impatiently on the table. The wife, perfectly manicured and wearing a pearl necklace, leaned in and whispered something to her son, who snickered under his breath. Their eyes flickered toward a woman who stood by their table, a maid. She was an older black woman, her uniform neatly pressed, her posture straight despite the weight of their cruel, judging gazes. She moved with quiet grace, but there was something in her eyes, something unshaken, something powerful. The chef watched as the father's voice rose, just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "You expect us to drink from these glasses. There's a streak on them." The woman bowed her head slightly. "I apologize, sir. I will replace them immediately." The son snorted. "Yeah, maybe try doing your job properly next time." The mother smirked, sipping her wine. "Honestly, standards have dropped." The maid didn't react, not in anger, not in humiliation. Instead, she nodded, took the glasses, and walked away with an air of quiet dignity. But the chef could see it, the way her fingers gripped the tray just a little tighter, the way she inhaled softly, centering herself before moving forward. He had seen this kind of scene play out too many times. People like them thought money gave them the right to belittle those who served them. But something told him this time they had picked the wrong person, because what they didn't know, what no one in this room knew, was that this woman wasn't just a maid. She owned the entire resort, and they were about to learn that the hard way. The chef kept his eyes on the woman as she walked toward the back of the dining hall. He had worked in enough kitchens, enough high-end restaurants, to know when someone was used to being looked down on, and when someone was simply choosing to play along. There was something about the way she carried herself, the way she refused to shrink under their cruelty. It wasn't submission, it was patience. He turned back to the stove, flipping the seared fish on the pan, but his mind was still on the scene he had just witnessed. He had seen plenty of entitled guests before, but this family had a special kind of arrogance, the kind that made his blood simmer. Meanwhile, the maid, Evelyn, entered a hallway behind the dining hall. Pausing for a moment near the staff entrance, she let out a slow breath, her grip on the tray easing. She had spent years learning how to mask her emotions, how to let insults roll off her back. But no matter how many times it happened, that sting never fully went away. She walked into the back room where a young waitress, Nina, was stacking plates. Nina turned, noticing the look on Evelyn's face. "Bad table?" she asked softly. Evelyn gave her a small smile. "Nothing I haven't handled before." Nina shook her head. "It's disgusting how some of these people act. Like we're invisible. Or worse, like we're beneath them." Evelyn placed the glasses into the sink. They only see what they want to see. She wiped her hands and glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost time. She had played this role long enough tonight, back in the dining hall, The wealthy family continued their meal, unaware of the shift that was about to take place. The father, Richard, waved a waiter over, complaining about the wine temperature. The mother, Victoria, made a comment about how the resort was losing its exclusivity because they had lowered their hiring standards. Their son, Ethan, scrolled through his phone, occasionally laughing at memes he found online. Completely indifferent to the world around him, the chef clenched his jaw as he watched the way they spoke about the staff, as if they weren't standing right there. He had spent years in kitchens like this, working under people who believed they were superior simply because of their wealth. He knew their type well. Then, the doors at the far end of the dining hall opened. The soft hum of conversation continued. But the moment Evelyn stepped back inside, the energy shifted. She was no longer carrying a tray, no longer walking with the quiet servitude expected of her. Instead, she strode in with confidence, her presence commanding attention without a single word. A few of the senior staff noticed first. They straightened, slightly, exchanging knowing glances. The manager, a tall man in a sleek black suit, hurried to her side, nodding respectfully. And then it happened. The resort's general manager, a man the guests had seen giving orders all evening, stepped forward and cleared his throat. His voice carried through the dining hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take a moment to formally introduce someone very special to this establishment. This is Evelyn Sinclair, the owner of this resort." A heavy silence fell over the room. The wealthy family froze. The father, mid-sip of his wine, lowered his glass, his fingers tightening around the stem. The mother's lips parted slightly, as if struggling to process what she had just heard. The son, who had been hunched over his phone, finally looked up. Evelyn let the moment stretch. She had seen this reaction before. The confusion, the disbelief, the silent recalculations running through their heads. She finally spoke, her voice, even and composed. "I trust you're enjoying your evening." Victoria forced a smile, sitting up straighter. "Oh, of course. Everything has been wonderful." Richard cleared his throat, recovering quickly. "Yes, very impressive place you have here." His tone was suddenly polite, the arrogance shrinking beneath the weight of realization. Evelyn gave a small nod. "I'm glad to hear that. I take great pride in ensuring that all my guests receive the highest level of hospitality." She paused, her gaze steady. "And that my staff is treated with the same respect." The words landed heavily. The message was clear. A ripple of murmurs passed through the other guests as they pieced together what had just happened. Some of them had seen how the family treated Evelyn earlier. Now, watching them sit in stunned silence, there was a quiet sense of satisfaction. The chef smirked slightly as he turned back to his station. Now, this was something he hadn't seen before. Evelyn held their gaze for a moment longer before turning to the manager. "Shall we proceed with the evening's announcements?" "Of course, ma'am," he said, stepping aside. As Evelyn walked toward the front of the dining hall, the wealthy family sat frozen in place. Their entire perception of the night flipped upside down. The air in the dining hall was heavy with unspoken words. The wealthy family sat stiffly, their polished confidence unraveling with each passing second. Richard glanced around, as if searching for a way to regain control, but there was none. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her hand resting near her untouched glass of wine. Ethan, their teenage son, sat unusually quiet, his fingers gripping his phone. But for the first time that night, he wasn't scrolling. Evelyn continued walking toward the front of the room, her posture poised and unshaken. The staff stood away, little taller now, their quiet smiles barely contained, as they watched their boss command the space. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with pure, undeniable authority, she reached the podium and turned to face the guests, the chandeliers casting a soft golden glow behind her. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice smooth and unwavering, "I want to take a moment to personally thank you all for choosing to spend your time at my resort. This place is more than just a luxury destination. It is a reflection of years of dedication, hard work, and a deep respect for the people who make it possible." Her words carried weight. Every guest, every staff member, and most importantly, the family who had humiliated her just minutes ago, listened intently. She glanced toward Richard and Victoria, her expression unreadable. Hospitality is about more than fine dining and breathtaking views. It is about the people who make your experience seamless, who work tirelessly behind the scenes. And yet, too often, they are overlooked, disrespected, treated as if they are invisible. A murmur rippled through the room. A few guests stole glances at the family, who sat rigid in their chairs, their faces pale. Evelyn continued, her gaze never faltering. "I have built this resort on a foundation of respect, and I will always ensure that every person who steps foot here, whether guest or staff, is treated with dignity." Silence. Heavy, pressing silence. Then, suddenly, applause. It started small, but quickly spread, the sound swelling as guests clapped in support. Some nodded in agreement, others exchanged glances, realizing they had just witnessed something rare. Justice served not with cruelty, but with grace. Richard forced a tight smile, nodding stiffly. "A very inspiring speech," he said, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Victoria tried to add something, but her words caught in her throat. She knew anything she said now would sound hollow. Evelyn met their eyes one last time before stepping away from the podium. She had nothing more to say to them. The message had been received, loud and clear. The family sat frozen for a moment before Richard hastily pulled out his wallet, waving over the manager. "We'll be settling our bill now." His voice was clipped, his discomfort evident. Ethan, who had been silent for most of the exchange, finally looked at his parents and muttered, "Maybe we should just go." Victoria exhaled, pressing her lips together as she slowly rose from her seat. For the first time in a long time, she had nothing to say. They left quietly, without another insult, without another glance back, and as they walked out of the grand dining hall, past the very people they had belittled, the lesson lingered in the air. Evelyn watched them go, but she didn't feel triumph. She didn't need it. True power was never in proving others wrong. It was in standing firm, in knowing who you are. And tonight, she had done just that. As the night carried on, the mood in the resort seemed lighter. Conversations flowed. Laughter filled the space, and the staff moved with an energy they hadn't felt in a long time. The chef, still stationed at the kitchen counter, let out a low chuckle as he watched Evelyn disappear into the back hallway. Her presence still felt long. After she was gone, well, he muttered under his breath, flipping a steak on the grill, "That was one hell of a dinner service." And with that, the night moved forward. But no one in that room would ever forget what had just happened. Not the guests, not the staff, and certainly not the family, who had learned in the most humbling way that respect is a currency far more valuable than wealth.